Shabbat Shalom. I want to get started right away, as I promised, about our very interesting mix of words that we're going to be discussing today. So let me share with you very quickly. So I'm calling this a very unusual, not unusual, this sounds unusual, teaching, standing grain, heaps, omers, armfuls, and tombs. And we're revisiting Deuteronomy 16:9. I do think I said 1 when I did the video from the Jewish cemetery the other day, but it's actually 16:9 that I'm revisiting. So let's get started. Before I really get very far into anything else, you're going to see me continue to use, let me shrink me, the Salkinson-Ginsburg Hebrew New Testament. And I want to encourage you to, if you can, begin to use this as a reference. You know, you can do something as simple as download Google Translate or use it online in your computer, and you can copy the Hebrew words of that Ginsburg-Salkinson's New Testament into the Google Translate, and get a lot of meaning out of it. But I want to show you why I'm so in love with the Salkinson-Ginsburg Hebrew New Testament by looking at the history of it. And the history of the translation of this New Testament, the articles that I looked at says that it's hardly been researched or documented. But the translator, speaking of Salkinson, the translator converted to Christianity. The Jewish poet and missionary Isaac Edward Salkinson worked on it for the better part of his life. Despite his conversion, Salkinson considered himself as a Jew. Emotionally and intellectually, he had strong ties to the Hebrew language, which he believed should replace Latin as the sacred language of Christianity. His translations reflect his dual motives and fell into two categories. And I see this when I read this translation. Some were intended to bring Jews closer to Christianity. Others were done for purely artistic reasons. So I want to stop here and I want to say, when I read the Salkinson-Ginsburg New Testament, I see the poetry of the Torah reserved in the words that are written, that he wrote, in translating the New Testament into Hebrew. That same beauty of Torah resides within the Salkinson-Ginsburg Hebrew New Testament. And just like the Torah, it's a language that is meant to build in your mind a picture. You know, we have words that have definitions. In Hebrew, all the words had a picture meaning. And so staying true to that and staying true to his Jewish roots, this Salkinson-Ginsburg New Testament does the same thing. When Salkinson passed away, he was just a few chapters shy of finishing his masterpiece. His good friend, Christian David Ginsburg, was also a Jewish scholar who became a Christian, finished the translation, and subsequently edited the first and second editions in 1885 and 1886. In this article, they outlined a brief history of the concept of this work. After Salkinson's death, Salkinson's death was quite unexpected, and the people who were publishing his book, the Trinitarian Bible Society, didn't want to cancel the publication of his work, and they were in a great hurry to find someone. So the task fell on David Ginsburg, Salkinson's old friend. Again, he was also a Jewish convert into Christianity, and he adopted a Christian name. He came from Poland, just as I think Salkinson came from Belarus, so from the same area. And they met in England, and they stayed as lifelong friends. So when Salkinson passed away, Ginsburg was the obvious choice. That is a prelude to what we're going to get into, why I trust the Hebrew New Testament written by Salkinson and Ginsburg so deeply, even though they became Christians, as we would say, from that understanding of what a Christian used to mean to us. Even though they became Christians, they never lost their Jewishness nor their desire to bring Jews closer to their Messiah. And so that's my great comfort when I use this translation. Okay, we're going to go. I've said this before. I'm going to say this probably a few more times in the future until a few more people hear it. But modern Hebrew, the Hebrew we speak today, has its basis from Torah. The known words from Torah form the core of our modern Hebrew language. And again, if you understand the root or the parent word, you understand 50% of the words that came from that root or shorish. The basis of understanding the next generation of words came from the root, comes from the meaning of the root. Again, I believe this is the time period with Salkinson's Hebrew New Testament, Salkinson Ginsburg, and with the modern language, we can see that they were all contemporary. I believe Yah began to spread his Torah by using these three men. You can see the father of modern Hebrew, Eliezer ben Yehuda, arrived in 1881. We can see Edward Salkinson's by 83 had passed away and was almost finished with the Hebrew New Testament. And then his friend David Ginsburg finished the book and passed in 1991, while Eliezer ben Yehuda, the father of modern Hebrew, passed in 1992. I don't believe that these are coincidences, but I want this foundation under you as we go where we're going now. Some things to remember as we approach the study. Do we really believe that Yeshua, we'll use this word because it's what everybody used, that Yeshua fulfilled or exemplified the requirement of the law with his life and body? So I'm going to look now with you in the Salkinson's New Testament, Hebrew New Testament, and we're going to see that it says here that he did not come to violate the law, lahaper. That's the infinitive, lahaper. The verb is parar, and you can find that throughout the Old Testament. He did not come to violate it, but he came to fill. So if we look at it now with the correct words in Hebrew, don't think that I came to violate the law or the prophets. I did not come to violate, but he said I came to malet, fill, not fulfill. Fulfill has a different meaning, as we'll see in a little bit. But let's continue Matthew 5. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or tittle shall in no wise pass from the law. He didn't fulfill it until all be filled, not fulfilled, filled. Lahaper is violate. Yeshua did not come to violate the law. He came to fill the law with a deeper spiritual understanding. So we're going to look at this word. Okay, here's parar. It often describes the violation of a covenant. Lahapir. He didn't come to lahapir infinitive, to violate the law. Genesis 17:14, failure to receive circumcision has broken lahapir, my covenant, parar. Leviticus 2:16 warns that despising statutes will parar, break my covenant. While 26:44 through 45 affirms that God will never reciprocate by breaking by parar, his covenant. Isaiah 24:5 broadens the scope. Mankind parar, broke, violated the everlasting covenant, explaining cosmic judgment. Ezekiel 16:59, Jeremiah 11:10, Malachi 2:14 through 16 shows Israel's marital and social unfaithfulness as covenant breaking. Again, parar, lahaper. The word that Yeshua used is he did not come, or I should say, Ginsburg and Salkinson chose, is that he did not come to break the law. Together, these verses underline that the covenant is the organizing principle of the redemptive history. To parar, it invites divine discipline in exile. Yet God's own faithfulness remains unbroken. Yeshua did not come to break or violate the law. He came to add meaning to the law, lamlet, to fill. The King James writer used fulfill, which is an abstract finish, as a finish for a project, a promise, or a dream. But when you fill something, you put something inside of a container until it's full. It's a vastly different term. When you fulfill something, you're finished with it. It's finished. I finished that project. I'm not going back to that project. I finished my promise. I kept my word. I don't have to go back to that word. But when you fill something, you put something inside of a container until it is full. You fill the container. I use this word when at the gas station the attendant asks me how much gas I want to buy. I tell him I want to fill my tank, malay or mala. The tank is already in place, but when I add the gasoline to the tank, it's no longer a dead implement. Without the gas in the tank, the tank is there, but the engine has no life. Without Yeshua, the law is there, but the law has no life. John 1:4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. In fact, Yeshua came to add deeper spiritual meaning to the law, or the container. Everything was made by Yeshua and for Yeshua. The law came from Yeshua, and he himself would fill it with meaning by the life he lived on earth. John 1:3 are proof texts that show that Yeshua made the law because he made everything that was made, and without him, nothing that was made was made. All things were made by him. Without him was not anything made that was made. 1 Colossians 1:16, for by him all things were created, that is in heaven or on earth, visible, invisible, whether they be thrones, dominions, or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and by him all things consist. By him they are all standing. So as we go into this next section, I want you to take with you that if Yeshua filled the law, because it was supposed to represent who he is, and that the container of the law, or the dead letter of the law, was given before the one that would fill it and give it meaning walked on earth, then we should expect in this next section, and where we're going to end up, then we should expect to see Yeshua and everything he was displayed within what we're going to look at. And in the beginning, it may be a little bit slow, but as we go along, I think you're going to see it. And spoiler alert, I've got so much. I think this is going to be 2 parts. I don't want to take you past an hour. I'll do a second part next week. I need, when you first begin to water your garden, and you want to just give it a really good drink, or make it really soaked, but you can go too far. You can go too far to the point that the ground or the heart, remember the parable of the sower, the good soil represents the heart. Even the good soil has a point where it can no longer absorb water. And I don't want to bring you to that spiritual point of the soil, the good soil in your heart, no longer being able to absorb. I want to give you enough, but I don't want to give you too much. So I feel that we're going to end up dividing this up today. I'm going to be watching my time, and I'm going to stop at about an hour. So here we are, Deuteronomy 16:9. This has been a verse of much debate, and I'm going to be as transparent as I can be. The reason we are back here again is because we are at the beginning of when people determine their calendars and the criteria that they use as. And there are some that will be influenced by the theology that on the wave sheaf day, Deuteronomy 16:9, on wave sheaf day, that you can wait till this day to determine whether or not there is any barley in the land of Israel that is in the condition of Eve. And these other people who believe this have a lot of followers, and they're very vocal, and their leader has a lot of books and does a lot of speaking. But these things don't necessarily make a person correct about what he's saying. And we're going to go 3D. We're not going to go to 3D. I can't reach into the computer and plunk you down on the land here with me, but we're going to go 2D. We're going to go as deep as we can. And it's going to be a bit tedious, maybe, if you're not a scripture nerd, if you don't like digging your nose in the books and looking at etymology and looking at everything you can look at and comparing it to other scriptures to see how many things you can pull together about the subject to get the fullest picture, and not just look at an isolated verse like Deuteronomy 16:9. This is an isolated verse, but what do the other verses that speak about the same subject have to say about this subject? So I'm going to take you as 2D deep as I can. 3D, I can't do. I can't pull you out of there and on the land with me, but I'm going to go as deep as I can with you. 7 weeks shalt thou number unto thee. Begin to number the 7 weeks from thou beginnest the sickle to the corn, is what it says in King James. Now, I've downloaded a new version of the Old Testament. It saves me a lot of time. Before I was going into eSword and pulling words over, but this new version I've been able to download not only gives the King James, but it also intersperses it with the Hebrew. And so we have something to look at as we look at what the King James says. So this says, beginnest the sickle. And here this is, it is the word harmesh. Harmesh is the sickle. But it also says here, bakama. Bakama is the name of the corn. And what that means is the corn or the grains are standing. We're going to look at this for a little bit. We're going to nerd out in etymology within the scripture. We're going to nerd out every place we can find this word comma. We're going to look at how it's used. Is this just a willy-nilly phrase that really just means grains and it's nothing special? Or is this a specific term? Much like when we did the study on the divisions of a day, we saw the scripture had a lot to say about the little nuances of every portion of a 20-hour period. And when you put them together, you got a picture that was absolutely complete and lacked nothing. And I hope that's where I'm leading you in this section. So, bakama, ba means in the. So it's specific, in the standing corn, not just in standing corn, but in the standing corn. Okay, so it's very specific. So again, got a little ahead of myself. I'm going to get rid of my face. Harvesting terms from the scripture, the etymology, and the resulting action of the word. What will we see? Standing corn, or barley in this case, because that's exactly what the verse was talking about, is not corn or barley in heaps. Standing corn is a specific term. It is not general. Exodus 22:6. If a fire breaks out and catches in the thorns, so that the stacks of corn, the gadish, or the standing corn, the kama, of a field be consumed therewith, he that kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. So already we see that standing corn is a unique kama, is a new unique term. Stacks of corn, gadesh, are another thing. Right down here, okay, there's the Gadesh, the stacks of corn. Here's the field. It mentions three things: the field, the standing corn, and the Gadesh. Okay. And let me just say here, I'm going to probably be popping my face back and forth. Comma is, or is a word that we use still in the morning. If we talk about like getting up, I would say ani kama b'sha'ar hamesh. I usually get up at 5 o'clock. And that is, we say kama when we stand up from the bed. Ani kama b'sha'ar hamesh. So that's exactly what this term means here, that the barley is standing, comma, in the field. And it also says that this word hashadeh, in the field, shalem, in the whole field. Shalem also means, from a modern perspective, it means some of these other things, but from a modern perspective, the whole field contained gadish and comma. It contained heaps and standing corn. So hashadeh shalem means the whole field. When I go to the butcher and I ask him, I want a whole chicken, I want a oaf shalem, I want it whole, I don't want to divide it up, I don't want just the thighs, I don't want you to cut it for me, I just want you to give me the whole bird. And sometimes that can be the head too, but that's another story. So this is what it's important that I bring out, that the whole field had not only comma, standing corn, it had gadesh, it had heaps. So gadesh is an unused root word meaning to heap up, a stack of sheaves. So now you've got the picture of a field with stacks or heaps of sheaves or barley bodies, and you have standing barley. You have barley that's been cut and it's laying in piles. It's no longer growing. It's been cut. The word would be katsar, would be docked. And then you have barley that's still standing and still drinking nourishment from the earth. We see a similar division of what's in a field found in Judges 15:5. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go in the kama, in the standing corn of the Philistine, and burnt up both the shocks, the gadesh, and also the kama. In this case, he burned up the vineyards and the olives. But I want you to see that kama means something that's still standing, and it is a delineation from what else can be in the field. I can't say it any plainer. A delineation from what else can be in the field. And right here, okay, b'chamot, that is plural of comma, and then mekadesh, that is gadesh, the heaps, and then comma. So God, Elohim, is giving us, he's teaching us about harvesting in ancient Israel. Okay, Deuteronomy 23:5. This is a very, very important verse because it tells us what we're allowed to do. When you come into the kama, bakamat, of thy neighbor, thou mayest pluckest the ears, the heads of the grain, melilat. Okay, melilat is different than another word we have that means kind of the same thing. We'll get to that later. I made a note of this melilat to compare against this other word that we have. So you may take the ears of grain with thy hand, but you will not sickle this harmesh. You will not sickle your neighbor's kama. So it's very important that we understand that we're not allowed to touch the standing grain of our neighbor with a sickle. We can pluck those heads, no problem. But we cannot put a sickle to our neighbor's standing corn, to the kama. Kama is used in contrast to grains laying in heaps. in contrast to an entire field. Its unique significance teaches us that if we enter our neighbor's field, we cannot take grains from the heaps that may lay in the field, and we cannot use a sickle on the standing grain of our neighbor's field, but we can pluck off the heads with our hands. And that's exactly what we see Yeshua doing with his disciples in Matthew 12:1. And at that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, through the grains, and the disciples were hungered, and they began to pluck ears of corn and to eat. Before we go to the next section, I think it's vitally important to recognize what, if you see it, you may not see it if you live in a city and if you don't live in an area with farmland, but I think it's vitally important to recognize what a harvest looks like in modern times. We don't see heaps. We see rows or furrows of harvested grain that lay in stripes across the field, but they don't lay in heaps. We're still looking at that word, gadish, that means to heap up. And they say here in English, of the English of the Strongs, a stack of sheaves. I can kind of see that. We'll get into that in a little bit. But a stack of sheaves, if a sheaf is an omer, a gidash is probably about 10 omers. It's probably an ephah. But it does mean to heap up a stack of sheaves. A shuk or a shok are words that have been used throughout history. The scripture uses the word ashok. I heard in some of the Old English, or I saw in some of the Old English writings, it was called also a shuk, but both are a gadish. Grains were gathered by the armfuls. Grains were gathered by the armfuls. The process of cutting the barley required that you cut it and put it in your arm, and you collected it until you had what you could handle. And then you bundled that and you laid it in the heap. And we see that taught by the scripture. The grains were gathered by the armfuls. And in this verse, we're going to see that it describes a Western, historical thought of what a sheaf is when it talks about gathering the sheaves by the armful. And just before we get into that verse, that word malila, it's very similar to the shibol in this verse. It says, "It shall be when the harvestman gathereth the corn and reapeth the ears, the shibol, with his arm, and it shall be that he gathered ears in the valley of Rephaim." Okay, the verse here, the point that we need to look at is what the action of the verse is, that the harvestman gathereth the grains and he reapeth the ears with his arm. When he reaps them, they go in his arm. He's gathering them by the armfuls. And it says that katsir, when he cuts them, when he docks them, the kama, the standing corn. Okay, very, very important that you understand that we're talking about standing corn being reaped. It makes no sense for the harvestman to gather reaped corn unless we're going to read about, like in Isaiah, when they were bringing the gadish or the sheaves out of the field on the Sabbath. But this verse is written so that we know that he's not doing that. The harvestman is not doing that. He's gathering the standing corn into his arms. Again, here is the word for standing corn, kama. And here is the word for the heads of barley, shibolim. Shibolim. This is a picture of what we've been reading about. It's not been that long ago. Well, whenever machinery came onto the scene, before that, all grains would have been pretty much gathered the same way for centuries. You see The harvester is cutting the standing corn. You see down here on the bottom of the left, the people are sitting on their bundles that they've gathered by their arm. And then these bundles that they've gathered by their arm, they have put in heaps. This is what we're used to seeing. And this is the way it was just not that long ago before machinery. So we have a change because the heap is no longer a gadish. It is a aram. Aram. Okay. Then aramot. And down here, ha'aramot. Okay. We're talking about a different thing. It's no longer a Gadesh. So it would seem to be that 10 omers make an ephah. And it would seem that a heap is a ram. And they were laid out in ephah quantities in some cases, or in other cases, when one came to a heap of 20 measures, but they were 10. So this was like a kind of like a verse that had bad news, like a curse. 2 Chronicles 31:7. In the third month, they began to lay the foundation of the heaps and finish them in the seventh month. Again, this is a aram. It is not a gadish. And that's okay. But we are looking at the terms that was used in ancient Israel for harvesting. Jeremiah 50:26. Come up against her from the utmost border until her storehouses. Cast her up in heaps. Armim, plural, armim. And destroy her utterly. Let nothing of her be left. So we're beginning to understand that Elohim sees the idea of heaps and omers and armful. They represent peoples and nations of people. From what I have seen so far, a ephah, that measurement, the 10 omers, represents a nation. But what makes up those omers are these armfuls cut by individual people. I hope you hang on to that. Maybe I'll remember to come back to it as we get to what we're going to look at in the New Testament, but that's so important. So what you're seeing from the pictures is that they harvested by their arm. They set them in heaps, which were either a gadish or an aram, and that measure represented like a nation. And then within that, there were these little individual armfuls that people had gathered. So this is a visual picture. Hebrew is a language of word pictures. Hebrew is a language of word pictures. And yes, this applies to what we looked at in the beginning. We're going to see the spirituality of this. I know this is hard. It's hard for me. It's hard for me to get you there. We have so much to cover. And I'm preoccupied with what I'm saying because I've been trained that nobody wants to hear you. You got to get it said and get it done. But these are not my words. These are Elohim's words, and you need to hear them, and you need to try to grasp them, and you need to try to understand them, because this is his scripture we're looking at, and in the intricate details, he has a message for us. Ruth 3:7. And Boaz went, and when Boaz had eaten and drunk, his heart was merry, and he lay down at the end of the heap of corn sheaves. He laid down at the end of the ha'arima. And we see the same thing, aram, right here.
In Song of Solomon, we see the word aramat, which is a plural of aram, and the belly is a heap. Move myself out of the way. I don't see the words. Okay, so this is the verse I was referring to earlier. And in those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in sheaves, that's a typo, It's aram and leading asses. They also as also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens which they brought in Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. I testified against them in the day wherein they sold their victuals. Okay, but what we're looking at is this word aram. It is a heap, but they're using sheaf here. Again, this is King James license themselves to use different words for the same Hebrew word. And I somewhat do understand that. I just want to add that I somewhat do understand that. When we're looking at like the word ochev, ochevet, ohavim, ohavot, ahavat, to love is the noun, ochev, ohevet, ohavim, ohavot is the verb. Well, that means like and it means love. It's not like many languages have more words than we have in Hebrew. So I do understand that tendency that the King James writers took to use words that they thought better fit the situation within the verse than just aram. We're going to use aram for everything. For some things, the King James writers used aram for sheaves, and some things they used heaps. So I just want to get that out of the way. But then again, this verse down here, Leviticus 26:5, I've just plugged that in because, we talk about the timing of the seven species. And here we've got sheaves, we've got wine, we've got figs, we've got grapes, and we have wine pressing going on. And but I brought in Leviticus 25 because it does show in a good year when they were obedient that the threshing or the grains would reach the vintage, and the vintage or the grapes would reach the sowing time, which is like the 7th and 8th month. This is a picture of exactly what we were looking at in the previous verse. These are the arams or the gadish or the shuk, the shok, the but, the heap, all those words we've been looking at. This is that picture, but specifically in the last verse, they were bringing the bundles, the arams, out of the field, and they were burdening the animals with them. So I just thought I would just put this here because it'll give you a bit more visual, bit more of a 2D look into the verse that we were looking at. And then you can see here, he's taking his probably pitchfork and he's throwing the armful into this threshing machine, and grains are coming out and they're loading it onto the wagon. So beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is a picture of bringing the heaps out of the field. Again, we have another illustration of some of the words we've been looking at, and this is just that time I'm using illustrations to drive it home, that this is a sadeh. In fact, this is a sadeh shalem. This is the whole field undivided. And in it we have kuma, we have standing grains, and we have heaps or gadish. We have both. Again, another picture. Here we have a heap. Here we have people gathering by armfuls. Here we have kuma. We have kama, kama, not kuma. So here we have kama. Here we have standing grains. I just am trying to flood your eyes with a picture we don't see, again, to add a two-dimensional understanding to the scripture. One more time, standing grains, comma. We have arm bundles. We have the individual arm bundles, and then we have the, well, we can use the word gadish or we can use the word aram, but they were called heaps. That's what I was looking for. They were called heaps. Okay. Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when ye be come into the land which I give you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then you shall bring a wave sheaf of first fruits of your harvest unto the priest. I have a problem with this word first fruits in Hebrew is the word bikur, but that doesn't exist here. It's in it's for the word omer. Remember we talked about the King James. They took these leaps to give themselves understanding. But when we talk about the purity of etymology, what is being used here, whoops, hang on, that was not the word omer. Here's the word omer. Omer was being used. It wasn't a first fruit. What Elohim is doing here is making sure that we understand whether he chose to use the word first fruit or he chose to use the omer, is that what came out of the field first belonged to him. So I've took this big mix of words right here and I've rewritten it just a little bit. So here's the Hebrew word and the meaning after it. When you dock off the severed, that thing that you're going to cut, you go with the omer first, reshit, the first omer of your harvest to the priest. Yes, this is talking about a bikur, but that's not what Elohim is saying here. He never used that word. First fruits is what the King James says. This is being spoke about as an omer. And it's important that you understand that you have to look at the words behind the King James English, behind any translation you have. I stay with the King James because it's tied to the Hebrew, and it's very easy for me to do research back and forth between King James and the Hebrew. But it's important that you understand what Elohim is doing is he's trying to reaffirm what a first fruits is. It is what you first dock out of your field, the first of the harvesting act, the first omer, the reshit omer of that harvest, of that field. That is what goes to the priest. The word bikur or first fruits is not in this verse. The intention of the verse is, again, the first fruits from the field belong to Elohim. When you sever it, you go with the omer to the Cohen. Leviticus 2:11, the second verse, and he will wave the sheaf before the Lord to be acceptable for you on the morrow after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. Now, it's a specific omer. That's what I'm showing you here, right here, though I didn't bring the whole verse through around like I did for this one. I'm giving you this, where is it? He shall wave the sheaf. It's nif et ha-omer, or omer, et ha-omer. So it's a specific. This et ha points directly at the omer. He's just not waving a sheaf. It is a specific omer that was offered on that day. It was the omer that made wave sheaf, wave sheaf. It was the omer that fulfilled the act of waving it before the Lord. It doesn't give it a, what it's not saying is, what it's not saying is only the very first omer that's been found on the entire land is the acceptable omer for wave sheaf. That is not what the verse is saying. Okay, it is not, and we're going to get to that, I promise. But hold that with you. Now we're back to Deuteronomy 16:9. And here's some of the things that that verse is not saying. Now that we've looked at all this stuff, now that we understand over here on the right that this is the whole field, that this is standing corn, that this is a heap, and that these are arm bundles, and they can all exist in the field. And Deuteronomy 16 talks about only the standing corn, okay? Only the standing corn. A specific sentence structure about a specific item, according to the scripture and the manner of the word, comma, and the manner of the word, comma, is used, there is room for first fruits to have been harvested and delivered to the temple. When the omer is the omer is ready to go. There's nothing in the scripture that says when your field produces enough arm bundles to make an omer that you should not take it. In fact, it says the opposite, that you take it. And Yeshua's going to reinforce that in the next couple of screens here. There is room for omer heaps to be laying in the field. There is, okay, let me start again. So this is what the verse allows for, Deuteronomy 16:9. It is not an exclusionary verse. Okay, it is a verse of, it's a positive command. What is standing, and when you put the sickle, and when you begin the count. Okay, so there is room for the first fruits to have been harvested and delivered to the temple. There is room for omer heaps to be laying in the field. You got that first omer in, you still got stuff ripening, and it's not quite time for the count to wave sheaf to begin. Then you have to leave your omers laying in the field. There is not room for the new crops to be used or consumed until the first fruits have been offered. There is not room for shoks, for bundles, for any of those words we use to be collected from the field. The harvest of the TheGalilean, the entire world. Now, this is going to take us into the next video, which is going to, let me just finish this, then I'll say it. The harvest of the TheGalilean, the entire world, would not begin until the handful of the wave sheaf was offered. Okay. In the next video, we're going to begin to overlay these things with the actions of Yeshua and the facts that we can glean and gather from what he did. An omer is given. That entire measure of a gallon of grains is given. Okay? But only a handful of that omer was offered. In Leviticus 2:2, it says, and I did not highlight it, it says that a handful of flour, let me just see if I can find it right here. Here it is, handful. Masalta. I've not said that word before. It's not something I know yet. Malay. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. Sorry. Malay kumzo. Kumzo. Malay kumso. So basically what he's taking is what he can reach in and grab, clutch in his hand. Okay. That's very important as we go into next week. Now, when we looked right back here about, I've lost it. I should have done it then. Right here, Leviticus 23:11, Nif et haomer, sorry, Nif et haomer. That's what the priest was to do on wave sheaf day. Look at what Yeshua says here. For the earth bringeth forth fruit of herself, first the blade, then the ear, then the full ear of corn. When the fruit is come, immediately he put in the sickle, because the harvest is come. Right here is the word nif magel. Magel. A magel is a handheld sickle. It's not a harmish. A harmish is usually on a longer stick, is my understanding. But a magel we still have today. It is a handheld, new moon sliver shaped blade on a handheld handle. So what you're seeing is really a picture that when the priest is waving the first fruits in the temple, that the men can now go into the field with their magal, with their hand sickle, and cause those grains to wave with the act of harvesting the grains. This is what I'm talking about, that the language of Hebrew paints you a visual picture if you can be diligent to follow these words all the way through the Bible. And this is where we're going to end the video today, is with these little bitty points from what we've gone through, and there's some hints of where we're going. A first fruit is the first omer from a field, which is cut and taken to the priest. The omer needs to be prepared, cut, threshed, winnowed, and ground to make a meat or a flour. A single graspful was offered from the omer. The rest belongs to the priest. The final armful had to spend 3 days in the earth, the sign of Jonah. A reminder in Deuteronomy 16:9, the command to harvest on Wave Sheaf Day was about beginning the count to Shavuot. The subject of the verse is not about holding your sickle from the grains until Wave Sheaf Day. And again, so what is all this to do with a Jewish cemetery? Okay. I promise next week this is all going to come together. This was the logical place to stop because next week, what I want to do is I'm going to overlay the components of what we've been looking at and show you how that falls out um, when Yeshua laid his life down that year. And if the law is spiritual and if the law was made by Yeshua and for Yeshua to correctly fill that dead vessel up with his life, then what I am saying to you and what I've said to you should overlay with what he did next week. But just on a funny little note, every time I read the verse in Isaiah about the guy who brings in the grains by the armful, I think of that old song, and I was sharing this with my husband. Um, I mean, I can remember this song from the one-room churches with screen doors and women using funeral fans. I can remember it from that far back. And the song is bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the sheaves. We shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves. Okay, I told my husband about that song. I said, every time I read that verse, I think about that. He says, huh, I used to think that was bringing in the sheeps. And I laughed and I told him about a song that my daughter misunderstood when she was a little girl, and I thought it was really, really cute. And when I got to the end of that, I said, wait a minute, how long did you think it was bringing in the sheeps? I said, sheep is the plural and sheep is the singular. So how long did you think this was bringing in the sheeps? I said, was it till I just told you just now? Yeah. Oh, that's my funny for the week. We're not bringing in sheeps, we're bringing in sheaves. Well, come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves. Again, I'll come back next week. I would appreciate your prayers this week. I am a little sore from yesterday. I was hit by a car. My car was hit by a car, and I'm a little sore. Got to deal with that on top of everything else. And I would ask you for one more favor. In the description box, I have left a link for my Etsy store. I'm trying to be like Paul and sell tents, trying to figure out a way to make a living as things get tighter. But the Etsy store is full of everything, I guess you could say, from the Torah observant crowd and whatever little name you like that describes exactly who you are in that broader term. All of those things in there are something that speaks to that. A few things are cute and fun. They're Hebrew slang terms, but I would ask you please to share that for me and help me get exposure. And that's all I've got. I'll see you next week and have a great week. Shabbat Shalom if it's still your Shabbat.